It is so easy for a day to get ruined, isn't it? Some trouble happens and it just sours your day. Maybe it's the first thing in the morning and not even the greatest cup of coffee is going to put a smile back on your face. Maybe it's a little inconvenience that really bugs you. Or maybe you heard word of something much bigger than that, something much more long-lasting, and really it has seemed to rip the joy right out of your life. When that happens, it can be easy for other people to see it in you, right? It can be tough to be sorrowful or sour and not let that kind of flow out of you and to the people around you too, right? Deep down, we know what we need to do. It's not who we are, and in this mood that we get sometimes, and so you wonder, how do I get back to normal? What is the fix? And maybe some help would be good, right? It's good to get some help, but what could really lift our spirits? What could put us all back together again? What could change our outlook on the day again and fill us full of joy once again? Is there some sort of soothing song we could play and listen to that would make us feel better? Or maybe we could watch a video of some sort, some really motivational speaker that would tell us a really moving story. Would that brighten our day? Or do we just need to get out for a walk, maybe some exercise, or maybe treat ourselves to one of our favorite snacks or a really nice drink? Do you think that would solve it all and put the joy back down inside? You know, when the trying times come, and sometimes it seems like they come at us constantly, it can be easy for that to flow right out of us, and that all may see. It can be hard to be sour and to not let that affect other people around us too. It's easy for our loving actions in general to just disappear. But there is one thing that can come and restore us and fill us full of joy and give us a new attitude and even change our whole effect upon other people. The risen Lord energizes us to live a life of love. You know, when bad times hit, sometimes we even play the compare game, and you kind of compare yourself with the troubles of others, and sometimes you win the battle and you have the worst troubles, or maybe it makes you realize things aren't as bad as you thought. But as we look at our gospel lesson today on page 7 in your worship folder, I don't think any of our lives have ever looked as bad as Jesus' life right here at this moment. Right here, Jesus knows very well that his life is coming to an end that very next day. He knows exactly what is going to happen to him, and he knew that his death was not going to be just quick and easy, something simple. But Jesus had even told his disciples that he would be lifted up on that cross in Jerusalem. And Jesus and all of them knew that that wasn't a death that was nice, good, honorable, easy, or merciful. And Jesus also knew that the death would come from people who were rejecting him. Even after everything that he had done for those 3 years of ministry, these people did not want what he had come to offer to them, and they didn't want it so much that they had plotted very deeply here to get rid of him and to do it in the worst imaginable way of that day. And Jesus knew that the action that would start all of these processes to unfold over the next day, that action that would start them, it would be done by one of his closest, dearest friends, a disciple named Judas. I don't think any of our days have looked as bad as Jesus' day right then and there. And that's how this lesson begins, right at that moment after Judas left. Judas had just ditched Jesus and ditched the rest of the disciples and just said farewell to the whole Passover festival, also that he could go and carry out the despicable act of betraying Jesus to his enemies. And so, if you would have ever thought that you've been in a pit of despair, you would think that Jesus was drowning in it right now. But then Jesus speaks. Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify the Son in himself and will glorify him at once. And so Jesus begins speaking, and you think he'd be talking about gloom and doom and some absolute disaster, but instead here he talks about glory right in the middle of something that hardly looks like glory. Judas had just gone, and this chain of events had begun that whole Maundy Thursday evening, and knowing this is going to happen, and yet Jesus speaks to his disciples, and as you hear all of the words that he says, it is hard to imagine them without a big old smile on Jesus' face, because all of these words are filled with so much care and compassion and love for his disciples and other people, and here too. But how could he do that? How could he speak of glory at a time like this? Because it was for that very reason, to die, that Jesus came into this world. Jesus was sent to this world to be what he had said here, to be the Son of Man. God himself wraps himself up in human flesh also that he could be present and live among his own creatures, his own people. God himself wraps himself in human flesh so that he could live a life of righteousness, that also that he could share that righteousness with all of us, his people. God himself wraps himself up in human flesh also that God could die on behalf of his people. Jesus' life was coming to what everyone around would think would be a miserable end. He was finished. But Jesus knows of all of that, the betrayal and the suffering and the death, and he speaks of glory. And he says this, everything around him here, this suffering and this death, it would bring glory to him, it would bring glory to the Father, and all of that glory would shine out at once for all to see at Jesus' resurrection. Even at that time, things were good. And you could see it in Jesus' face and hear it in Jesus' words. Even in that difficult time, things were good, and Jesus was letting that known to all those around. Oh, those disciples, though. They heard these bad words once again, right? They had heard Jesus talk about death before, and they tried to persuade him away from it, to distract him from it, to talk him out of it. But every single time, Jesus stopped that, and he seemed to always want to resolutely move forward to his death in Jerusalem. And there it was once again that night during the Passover feast, and you wonder, couldn't they just enjoy that evening that they had together? But no, he starts speaking about this suffering once again. And I think, like many of us at that moment, they just started immediately thinking how it was going to affect all of them. And so they had those conversations about who was the greatest and who would get to sit at the right and the left at his kingdom. And they had to start to wonder if they would be the ones that had the courage to go and defend Jesus. And then they were the ones wondering what their life would be like when Jesus wasn't around. Where was Jesus going, and will we know the way? And then Jesus speaks to them so lovingly in verse 33. Dear children, I am going to be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I am going, you cannot come. What? Jesus is only going to be with us a little longer? And where he is going, we cannot come, and we will be looking for Jesus? who have been following you all of these last 3 years, morning, noon, and night, listening to you and learning from you, if it's going to end like this. Jesus, we all kind of had some ideas about how this was going to turn out. And you said something about glory, and we like that, but I don't know if we like the way that you are saying you're going to get to that glory, all of that suffering. Jesus, I don't know. Oh, for Jesus' disciples, things weren't looking too up, were they? But some of Jesus' words here, you would think they would really start to sour that whole Passover festival, and nothing could put a smile on their faces, even if Jesus said all of this with a big old smile. But what did Jesus say? But he talked about how he came into this world to bring glory to himself and to his Father, all by winning forgiveness for the world. And Jesus was just about to finish everything that he had come to do, that his Father in heaven had sent him to do. Everything that the entire scriptures, the ancient scriptures, had announced that the Messiah was going to do for them. It'd be done. And soon, I'm going to be with you only a little longer. Yay! And where I am going, you cannot come. And you know, they shouldn't have been so disappointed in those words. It's not like Jesus was excluding them, like they were losing out on getting to go on a roller coaster ride because they were too short or something like this. Jesus was going to the cross, and that is where they could not go. It's not that Jesus was really an introvert and didn't really want their company, because he loved their company all of those years. And even that night in Gethsemane, he wanted their company and their attention and their prayers together with him. But Jesus, going to the cross, he was going to go alone. And that was an incredible act of love, agape love, sacrificial love, love for you and for me, all for our benefit, for our forgiveness, also that we can receive from him a free gift of forgiveness, to be able to share in his glory that he will give to us and we will be a part of forever and ever and ever. It really wasn't such bad news after all, was it? They might have felt a little sad at that moment, or their day was being a little soured or spoiled, but through Jesus' loving words and loving actions, Jesus was showing them, even in this tough time, through his love, how things were good and right with him. You know, Jesus gave his life for all of us, for you, for me, and that's real sacrificial love that lifts us up and pulls us out of the pit and changes our attitude and gives us a future. It puts the smile back onto our face even when things seem terrible. Like this day right here when everyone thought that Jesus was finished. And even on those days where anyone around could look at you and think you're in an impossible spot with no hope whatsoever. But yet you know Jesus. And you know what Jesus has done for you. You've learned what true love is. You've seen his sacrificial love. Love that has changed your future, and love that has given you a future. And Jesus fills us with that hope and joy even in the worst of times, because as we look at this, we know this is the worst that evil could do to Jesus, and he won. Jesus was triumphant and rose from death to life on Easter Sunday, and he is risen, and he lives even today. So things are good for you and me, even in tough times. And we see that in Jesus' loving actions. And he goes on and he says, "A new commandment I give you, love one another." Which really wasn't such a new commandment in the way that we often think new, but that word means fresh, or having a new quality. And to be clear, Jesus goes on talking, and he explains what he means. He goes on to define what is new. He says, just as I have loved you, so also you are to love one another. So what is new? But learning what love is. Love that sacrifices for others. And we see the light of that love on Jesus' cross, all for others. What is new? But that this is our motivation. It is clear all throughout Scripture that God desires us to live a life of love for others, but why? Because we know Jesus and what he has done for us. Shame and guilt, even under God's perfect law, could never move us to work this kind of love, but this kind of love is a God-grown fruit of faith. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross and the forgiveness that he brings, that is what changes our hearts and gives us a whole new attitude and changes our actions that everyone sees. He says, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. If you have love for one another. Oh boy, I can't end this sermon piling on the guilt, can I? I mean, couldn't he have just ended this saying, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you are rude and mean to everyone? If you are cold-hearted to all those around? If you are crass and selfish or arrogant or something like that? But no. Jesus gives us this commandment, very clearly defined, and even gives us a test. He says, if you have love for one another, test it, then everyone will know that you are my disciples. If you have love for one another, they will see your faith. Love one another. Even when they're being a total pain. Even when I'm having a terrible day. Why? Not because it gets our home in heaven any more secure. No, Jesus' love, his sacrifice, his death and resurrection brings us to our heavenly home. So why? By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples. In your sacrificial love for other people, people will see your faith. And God may be giving you a wonderful opportunity through everything you do and say to point them to the one who is their Savior too. Help them. Help them see Jesus through your actions of love. You know, life in this world can be pretty miserable at times, and it really can be pretty easy to let that shine and show right through us, especially when we are dealing with something pretty inconvenient or something really serious. But there is only one thing that can fill us with joy, give us a new attitude, and change our effect on other people. One thing that is even better than your favorite drink or favorite snack while you're walking in a park on a beautiful day, listening to soothing music and reading your favorite book, because this one thing will not be short-lived. Your risen Lord energizes you to live a life of love. In Christ, we just want to love, to sacrifice for others. So let his love motivate you to show clearly through a life of love that you are a disciple.